Hello, today we have Chapter 4, The Illusions of the Ego, Section 5, The Ego Body Illusion. All things work together for good. There are no exceptions except in the ego's judgment. The ego exerts maximal vigilance about what it permits into awareness, and this is not the way a balanced mind holds together. The ego is thrown further off balance because it keeps its primary motivation from your awareness and raises control rather than sanity to predominance. The ego has every reason to do this according to the thought system which gave rise to it and which it serves. Sane judgment would inevitably judge against the ego and must be obliterated by the ego in the interest of its self-preservation. So, one of my favorite things to remember is all things work together for good. All things work together for good. When the ego is trying to sort out and judge, to just put everything in the same category and be at peace and be calm and accept and remember how much we're loved. Okay. A major source of the ego's off-balance state is its lack of discrimination between the body and the thoughts of God. Thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. The ego therefore either distorts them or refuses to accept them. It cannot, however, make them cease to be. It therefore tries to conceal not only unacceptable body impulses, but also the thoughts of God, because both are threatening to it. Being concerned primarily with its own preservation in the face of threat, the ego perceives them as the same. By perceiving them as the same, the ego attempts to save itself from being swept away, as it would surely be in the presence of knowledge. What did I want to look at there? Let's see. Yeah, this is it. Thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. And any lesson in A Course in Miracles can be thought of as a thought of God to help us on our way, and you receive them too, just in your mind. But it's totally unlike anything the ego offers. Thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. So thoughts are either ego food or something the ego would try to cover up. So we come to trust those thoughts that the ego would try to get us to not see. Okay. Any thought system that confuses God and the body must be insane. Yet this confusion is essential to the ego, which judges only in terms of threat or non-threat to itself. In one sense, the ego's fear of God is at least logical, since the idea of Him does dispel the ego, but fear of the body, with which the ego identifies so closely, makes no sense at all. The body is the ego's home by its own election. It is the only identification with which the ego feels safe, since the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. This is the belief that the ego sponsors eagerly. Yet the ego hates the body because it cannot accept it as good enough to be its home. Here's where the mind becomes actually dazed. Being told by the ego that it is really part of the body and that the body is its protector, the mind is also told that the body cannot protect it. Therefore the mind asks, "Where can I go for protection?" To which the ego replies, "Turn to me." The mind, and not without cause, reminds the ego that it has itself insisted that it is identified with a body, so there is no point in turning to it for protection. The ego has no real answer to this because there is none, but it does have a typical solution. It obliterates the question from the mind's awareness. Once out of awareness, the question can and does produce uneasiness, but it cannot be answered because it cannot be asked. So this feeling of uneasiness, I'm going to pause for a minute. This feeling of uneasiness that arises can be remedied by just turning to a thought of God and reminding ourselves of what is real. Okay, this is the question that must be asked. Where can I go for protection? Seek and ye shall find does not mean you should seek blindly and desperately for something you would not recognize. Meaningful seeking is consciously undertaken, consciously organized, and consciously directed. The goal must be formulated clearly and kept in mind. Learning and wanting to learn are inseparable. You learn best when you believe that what you are trying to learn is of value to you. However, not everything you may want to learn has lasting value. Indeed, many of the things you want to learn may be chosen because their value will not last. The ego thinks it is an advantage not to commit itself to anything that is eternal, because the eternal must come from God. Eternalness is the one function the ego has tried to develop, but has systematically failed to achieve. The ego compromises with the issue of the eternal just as it does with all issues touching on the real question in any way. By becoming involved with tangential issues, it hopes to hide the real question and keep it out of mind. The ego's characteristic busyness with non-essentials is for precisely that purpose. Preoccupations with problems set up to be incapable of solution are favorite ego devices for impeding learning progress. And we learn to, when we notice we're observing a problem, remember that it's the Holy Spirit's job to resolve this problem, to guide us through, to show us. In all these diversionary tactics, however, the one question that is never asked by those who pursue them is, what for? This is the question that you must learn to ask in connection with everything. The question that I must learn to ask in connection with everything is what for? To not accept blindly ego's agenda. What is the purpose? Whatever it is, it will direct your efforts automatically. And I really appreciate lately noticing that we're on automatic no matter what. It's just the choice is between our true self running the show, spirit, our true thoughts running the show, and that's on automatic, right? Or an ego, the sense of what isn't and can never be, running the show and giving us all of our perceptions. That is also automatic. So it's not like that totally dissolves the idea of separate me autonomy, because no matter what unfolds, it's automatic. So either I'm turning to the real, to our shared and innocent forever and always loved and loving self, to give me all my thoughts and give me all my perceptions, or I'm turning to what isn't and what can never be, a fantasy, intent on showing me guilt and destruction everywhere. And that is also automatic. So whatever unfolds, it's automatic. It's not coming from a separate self that doesn't exist. It's not affected by other separate selves that don't actually exist. It's just two automatics that I can choose. I can choose the automatic of the real, or I could choose the automatic of the unreal. So that makes the decision very, very easy. Okay, when you make a decision of purpose, then, you have made a decision about your future effort, a decision that will remain in effect unless you change your mind. And thank goodness every moment is for changing our mind if it needs changing. If it's not in peace, we can choose peace. Thank you.